Shouting "Death to America," demonstrators lash out, smash stores, and torch an effigy of President Obama. Even with police presence, protests here have turned ugly.
Altogether, I think we have somewhere between 30 and 40 casualties.
This rage has boiled over in every Afghanistan city after a radical Florida preacher did the unthinkable.
And the Qur'an was found guilty.
Terry Jones ordered the Muslim holy book burned, igniting a firestorm.
Of course, we're devastated by what happened. Obviously, that is terrible. Anytime people are murdered or killed, we don't feel responsible for that, of course.
While most media ignored it, Afghan President Karzai drew attention to the Qur'an burning that led to the brutal killing of United Nations staff when a frenzied mob, including former Taliban, stormed their building.
We condemn the action of an individual in the United States who burned a holy Qur'an. That action was hateful, it was intolerant, and it was extremely disrespectful.
Strong words from the West have done little to quell Afghan anger, and the Taliban is exploiting it, endangering the mission and the soldiers still fighting a war there.
This pastor, with his publicity stunt with the Qur'an, unfortunately endangers the lives of our troops and a lot of innocent people.
Even the president has condemned Pastor Terry Jones. Despite that and hundreds of death threats, Jones is planning a second act, an anti-Islamic protest at America's biggest mosque for sometime later this month. Joy Malvin, CTV News, Washington.
Joining us now on the line from Washington is Michael Shank. He is a senior policy advisor for U.S. Congressman Michael Honda. These images that we're seeing from overseas of President Obama being burned in effigy, how much does this harm America's standing among Muslims?
Scott, let's back up a little bit, because the burning of the Qur'an really just gave voice to frustration that was already there. You know, the majority of the Afghan people want the troops out on or before 2011. Why? Because they've seen a worsening of crime, a worsening of violence. They haven't seen economic opportunity or freedom of movement increase recently. They've also not seen improvement in basic services like electricity, food, medical care. So there's a great amount of frustration throughout the Afghan majority in response to the troop presence. Something like this, in terms of the burning of the Qur'an, just gives voice to that. Now, in terms of the U.S. standing in the Muslim world, I think there's a lot of concern about the latest invasion of Libya, because that's now the third Muslim country that the Western community has invaded after Iraq and Afghanistan, now Libya. But also, in terms of the Qur'an burning, why did it happen? What allowed it to happen? I want to look at the U.S. for a second. A couple weeks ago, Congressman Peter King, as chair of the Homeland Security Committee, hosted on the Hill these hearings titled essentially Radicalization of Muslim American Community. A lot of people felt that really vilified, denigrated Muslim Americans, really took issue, created an enemy out of a religion, not unlike what we did with Japanese Americans in World War II, putting them in internment camps. That created a culture where the burning of Qur'an was somewhat allowed, at least in a small community, a small religious community, to erupt. So if we're looking at how to tackle this issue, we have to look at Afghanistan, but we also have to look at Libya, and now we have to look at America in terms of what culture and context allows for these violent protests to erupt.
Is it possible to repair the damage, or is it far too late, especially considering that nowadays when people can see these kinds of images very quickly because of social media, the damage has got to be pretty long-lasting, considering that how many people probably saw this?
Well, apologies are important, and Petraeus and now President Obama apologized. That's critical, and after NATO killed 9 kids gathering wood in Afghanistan, that created an uproar on the ground. There was an apology after that. Apologies are important, but it can only do so much in terms of dealing with perception, and perception is key. No matter how much good the U.S. government, Western allies are doing in Libya, Iraq, or Afghanistan, perception is critical. And so, you know, as the Western alliance invades another Muslim country, as Congressman King hosts in Washington these hearings that are perceived to be anti-Muslim, how does that resonate throughout the world in social media, as you mentioned, because it resonates in real time, and no amount of apologies can ever really kind of undo some of that damage.
I imagine this is going to provide Gaddafi more ammunition against the U.S. in the fight that he has on his hands.
Absolutely. And again, this is a war of minds and words as much as a war of actual machinery on the ground. And so in terms of waging the good war in terms of winning the hearts and minds. Going back to the first point I had, if we really care about winning the hearts and minds of Afghans, we have to make sure crime and violence is decreasing. We have to make sure economic opportunities is increasing, freedom of movement is increasing. But to the basic services, you know, do they have more electricity during the day? Do they have more food? Do they have more access to medical care? These things have to increase. Otherwise, their correlation, they're making the assumption that U.S. troop presence are here, these things have decreased, violence has gotten worse, they're not making life better for us. So that's the real meat of it.
On the line from Washington, Michael Shank, thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott.